Hi guys. Um, Before I start, I just want to tell you that I thought for Friday's Zoom chat, everyone could bring a joke, and we'll start our vacation off with a bunch of jokes. So be thinking of your best one and bring it to the Zoom chat on, actually it's on Thursday, I'm sorry, it's on Thursday of this week, same time, 10 o'clock on Thursday. Bring a good joke, okay, or riddle or whatever, something that's going to make us laugh. Okay, so we're going to pick up where we left off, and remember Peter's kind of getting all choked up and teary-eyed because he's realizing that he may not get to PAX in time. So he squeezed his eyes shut against the tears still crowning. I'm not angry. It's just that I didn't choose it. I didn't choose for there to be a war. I didn't choose for my father to join it. I didn't choose to leave my home. And I didn't choose to go to my grandfather's. And I sure didn't choose to abandon an animal that I took care of for 5 years. You're a kid. You don't get you don't get a lot of choices, said Vola. I'd be angry too. Diableman angry. I told you, I'm not angry. Peter gulped in a sob that somehow escaped as a twisted laugh. He was short-circuiting again. And you're in love with that word, you know, said Peter. What are you talking about, boy? Diableman. What is it? A swear? You're in love with the word diableman. His wiring felt totally fried. If we were in second grade, I'd tell you you're so in love with that word you should marry it. She squawked a loud crow caw. But you're right, she said. I should get down on one diableman ruined knee and ask that you would marry me. You should, Peter argued. Oh, I'm sorry, and ask that word to marry me. You should, Peter agreed, kind of hysterical now. You should put a diableman ring on its diableman finger. And he wiped his face off and watched Vola as she came over and took the seat across from him. My grandfather swore in his first language. It drove my grandmother crazy because she didn't speak it. But she sang in Italian when she cooked, so Vola lifted a finger to stroke the feathered bunch at her throat. I carry many traits, she said quietly. And then she went silent for a while, holding his gaze the whole time. In their silence, Peter felt they were saying something important. Something about the long, dark tunnel he felt narrowing in around him. I was counting on finding PAX in a week, maybe 10 days. He looked down at his foot. But now... PAX? That's his name? That means peace, you know. Peter already knew that. Lots of people had told him that. But that's not why I named him Pax. First day I brought him home, I left him for a minute, just a minute, so I could get him some food. And when I got back, I couldn't find him. He had crawled into my backpack and fallen asleep. It had the word Paxton sewn on the label. I was 7 then, and I figured, Paxton, that's a good name. It had an X in it, like fox, you know. But now what? Asked Vola. Now he's all alone because of a war. I let him go because of a war. War, not peace. What's that called? Irony? Whatever. Now it's just a terrible name. He'll probably die because of a war. Maybe yes, maybe no. He could survive. It's spring, you know. Plenty of food, I'd think. Peter shook his head. Foxes teach their kits to hunt when they're about 8 weeks old. I found him way before that. He was maybe 2 weeks old, the vet figured. He could run across a dozen mice sitting up on little plates, and he probably couldn't catch them. All he's ever had is kibbles and the scraps that I'd let him swipe from me under the table. Well, what kind of scraps? Anything he'd find out in the woods? Peter shrugged. Well, he's crazy for peanut butter. He likes hot dogs. He loves eggs. No, unless he stumbles into someone's picnic, he's going to starve. He'll find water, I figure, and he can probably go a week without food. But after that... Peter dropped his head to his hands. I let it happen. I didn't choose any of it, but I didn't fight it either. I don't know why I didn't fight. Except, of course, he did know. When his father had first dropped the order about Pax, Peter had steeled himself and said, "No, I won't do it." But his father's eyes had flared with that flash fire anger, and his fist had jerked up, stopping only at the last split second to knuckle Peter's cheek in a gesture that carried enough threat to set Pax on growling alert. Peter's own fists had come up, and the rage he had felt at his father had scared him more than the threat itself. He heard his grandfather's words now, "Our apples don't fall far from the tree," and he felt sick and afraid all over again. He dropped his gaze to the worn pine table to hide the shameful headline he felt burning across his face. Vola reached over and cupped the top of his head with both hands. Peter froze. Except for an occasional attaboy shoulder shake from his father or a casual arm punch from one of his friends, no one had touched him since his mother. Vola paused as though she knew he needed time. Then she pressed down firmly. It was a strange thing to do, but Peter didn't pull away. He didn't move a muscle. He didn't even draw a breath. Because at that moment, her strong grip was the only thing keeping him from flying apart. "Well, that's over now," she said. "Isn't it?" She got up. "I may not have your answers, but I do know one true thing about you. You need food. A lot of food. You're 12, you've slept out in the cold, and you've got a bone to heal. I'm going to set that bone now. Then I'm going to start cooking, and you're going to start eating, and neither one of us is going to stop until you say so. You got it?" Peter's belly was suddenly a hollow, snarling crater. "Yes, ma'am, I've got it." Vola rummaged under the sink and drew out a sack of plaster. Peter watched her sift some into the bucket and then pump in some water. Then she brought over the thing that she had been sewing. "Foot up," she said. Vola propped a pillow under his knee and worked a quilted sleeve over his leg, kind of like an open-toed sock. He recognized the yellow checked material. He glanced into the bedroom to be sure. "You cut up your quilt?" he said. "I can always make another one. You need the cushioning." She took another section of quilt and stripped the batting off and then ripped the yellow calico into strips and dunked them into the plaster. "Hold your foot at a 90-degree angle," she told him. And around his foot and ankle, halfway up the shin, she wrapped the strips. When she had built a thick boot, she frosted it with more plaster. "Don't move," she said. "Not even your toes." So she made a plaster cast for him out of the material from her quilt and the plaster. Vola left for the porch and came back with her arms full. She set 2 iron skillets on burners, flipped a hunk of butter into each, and turned on the flames. She cracked a couple of eggs into a yellow bowl and started whisking in milk and then cornmeal. A cool breeze, fragrant with turned earth and frying butter, lifted against Peter. He looked at the sturdy cast drying, his foot safe inside now, wrapped in what used to be Vola's quilt. "I'm sorry about how I've been." He tipped his head to her bulletin board. "Oh, those are my philosophy bingo cards," she said with a nod. "No bat Peter. Those are just the things I figure to be true about the world. The universals. The important ones are the things that I figure out to be true about me. I keep them somewhere else, private." "How come?" asked Peter. "How come they're the important ones, or how come they're private?" Peter shrugged. "Either. Both." He leaned back, waiting. Vola eyed him as she sawed a slice off a ham joint and forked it into one of the frying pans. She dipped out 3 ladles of batter, poured them sputtering into the other pan, and then set the bowl down. "I'm going to tell you a story," she said. "When I got out of the service, I didn't remember a single true thing about myself. That's what training does. No more individuals, just pieces they can mold to their machine. I was lost my first day as a civilian. A civilian is just a person who's like us. We're not in the Army or Navy or anything. We're just regular old people. That's a civilian. So I was lost my first day as a civilian. Lost. I went into a grocery store. I stared at all the choices, and I kept wondering who I was supposed to be buying groceries for. What filled this person's hungry belly? Gumbo or pie, beans or bread? In the produce aisle, I broke down because I didn't remember a single thing about myself. Vola went quiet, then her eyes closed. What happened? Peter nudged after a moment. What happened? Yeah, in the store. What happened in that store? Oh, she turned back to the stove and flipped the Johnny cakes, which are like cornbread. Peanut butter. Peanut butter happened? Asked Peter. Vola tossed her hands into the air. Peanut butter happened, and I was lucky it did. There I was on the floor of the grocery store, dirty, red and white checkered linoleum I will never forget. And I was weeping, and I knew I wouldn't get up until I remembered what kind of food I liked. Vola stacked the Johnny cakes on a blue plate and then paused. Peter thought she might be drifting back to the memory of the grocery store floor. He was glad he hadn't seen something like that. A grown woman sobbing on a dirty grocery store floor. A crazy lady with one lost leg. He felt suddenly protective and hoped no one had laughed at her and that she had gotten herself out okay. And, he said, oh yeah, well, and finally I did. I remembered my grandmother telling me that when I first discovered peanut butter sandwiches, I wanted one every day. So I got up from the floor and I bought myself some peanut butter and bread. I filled my cart with peanut butter and bread because I decided I wasn't coming back until I knew for sure something else I liked to eat, and I was afraid that might be a long time. She added the ham to the plate, slapped on a scoop of applesauce, and brought it over to him along with a white pitcher of maple syrup. Go ahead and eat, she said. Peter flooded the plate with syrup and loaded a fork. The cornmeal had a gritty crunch. The ham was smooth and salty against the sweet syrup. It was the best food he could ever remember eating. And what was it, he asked when he had cleaned half the plate. A long time before you remembered something else you liked? Vola pressed a finger to the drying cast. Almost set. Keep still a little while longer. And she went back to the stove and carved more ham and ladled more batter into the skillet. Yeah, it was, she said. People around me, they call it PTSD, which stands for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, from being in the war. And they were right that I was sick. But I knew it wasn't being in the war exactly. It was that in the war, I had forgotten everything that was true about myself. Post-traumatic, forgetting who you are disorder. That's what I had. My grandfather was in a nursing home by then, and he was dying. I went out to his place. It had been my old home, too. My grandparents raised me for a couple of years, and I went there to clean it out. It was the end of summer. The orchard was an untended mess, but there were still some peaches hanging on, and that was the second lucky thing that happened to me after the peanut butter, because I suddenly remembered, Lord, I had loved those peaches. I used to sneak out in the middle of the night to pick them. I'd sprawl on the grass underneath those trees with fireflies flashing all around and katydids singing, a heap of peaches on my belly, and I'd eat them till the juice ran into my ears. I remembered that so clearly. I could smell that memory. I could hear it, and I could taste it. But I couldn't figure out how that girl could be the same person who had put on a uniform, picked up a gun, and done the things that I had done in the war. So I reached up and picked one of those peaches, and I laid myself down on the grass and bit into it, and there I was. I found another little true piece of my old self. She brought the skillet over and stacked more Johnny cakes and ham onto his empty plate, and then went back to the stove. Stop, Peter said. Stop? Well, that's the end of the story anyway. No, I mean, this'll be enough food, thank you. Peter wished again that his fox were under the table, wondered again if Pax was hungry, and then had the curious sense that he wasn't. But maybe tonight at least Pax had food in his belly. So then what? He asked after loading his fork. You were okay? Vola set the skillet in the sink and came back to sit across from him at the table. What a person likes to eat? That's a detail. I was so lost, I needed to find out all the true things about myself, the little things to the biggest of all. What did I believe in at my core? Peter figured he knew what was coming. Like war? Now you're anti-war, right? Vola steepled her fingers under her chin. That's a complicated thing. What I am is for telling the truth about it, about what it costs. People should tell the truth about what war costs. That's taken me a long time to figure out. She leaned back. And that was just one thing I had to relearn, everything that was right and wrong for me. But I couldn't. The world was too loud for me to hear myself think. So I moved into my grandfather's place. I decided to stay there until I knew who I was again. Peter looked up at the jarred peaches on the shelf above him, then recalled the blooming trees in the orchard. And you're still here, he said. This is that place, isn't it? Sounds like she did find herself in her grandfather's farm. Okay, so that's the end of that chapter. And I'll see you for the next chapter. Bye-bye.